Welcome to either hold on to your questions until there's time for them then, or you can write them in the chat during the presentation, and I'll read them out for James during the Q&A. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, James Hawes. James is a Montreal poet, a filmmaker, and the founder of Turret House Press, the hippest micropress dedicated to new and experimental poetry, which he started in March 2022. Since then, Turret House has gone on to publish over 20 poetry chapbooks, as well as the Frog Pond Review, a poetry magazine that has featured such writers as Sarah Burgoyne, Nelson Ball, George Bowering, Gillian C., Misha Solomon, and many more. James, thanks so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Thanks, John, and thanks to the QWF for inviting me. A lot of people here, a little nervous, but that's okay. So I'd like to start just with a quick story. A little while ago, when I just started writing, I was like many of you probably do. I was, I subscribed to quite a few submittable mailing lists, right? So, if people are calling out for submissions, you get these mailing lists, and I saw one for a little magazine called the Wes Andersine, which is this right here. Now, this is a publication out of the United Kingdom dedicated to the films of Wes Anderson. And I just happened to have, at the time, I just happened to have this little poem about the Gypsy Cab Company, which is this fictitious cab company that sort of appears in a few Wes Anderson films. And so I had no use for this poem whatsoever. It was just something that I had written, and that it was just sitting in my, list of work. So I sent it in, and it was accepted, and it's the first item in this magazine. One thing I love about it, and which is kind of indicative of the micro independent small press, is you can actually see above my name that there was a hair on the photocopier when this was printed. And so every copy of this magazine, which is I think maybe printed 50, 60 copies of it, has a hair that runs across my name. So this is something that I really love about the micropress world. If you've got a niche, there's somewhere, if you've got something that doesn't necessarily fit in anywhere that you can think of, somewhere there's probably something that you can submit to that will, that might be interested in it. So just to give you a bit of background about Turret House, my uncle, who was a writer in the United Kingdom, his name was Chris Hawes, and he was a playwright and a poet and a novelist. And he's that kind of, that person in your life that you have that introduces you to a lot of neat things. When I was 21, he bought me this book here, which is The Rattle Bag, which is a poetry anthology edited by Ted Hughes and Seamus Haney. As you can see, I have, he bought me this when I turned 21. So that was 33 years ago. So he was the person who really introduced a lot of neat things to me. He was an artist, so he would disappear for months and years on end, and we wouldn't hear from him. He was always broke, but he would show up eventually, and he would always have music and films and things like that would that he would introduce me to, and he would expose me to. You always have these people who expose you to neat things throughout your life, particularly your young life. And he passed away a couple of years ago, and he and his wife both died kind of close to each other. And as weird happenstance would have it, his wife, who was younger than him, happened to pass away before him. And so his estate was left to my sister and I. And he had which we ended up splitting with her family, of course, anyways, but legally it was all ours. And because they were artists, of course, they were completely useless when it came to anything in terms of their estate. So everything legally fell to my sister and I. And so, after everything was done, I had a little bit of money. And so what I did was something that I always wanted to do. So in his memory, I started Turret House Press in 2022, which was about a year and a half or so after he passed away. I called it Turret House Press because his house in Youlegreve, England, which is in the Peak District of England, beautiful part of the country, was called Turret House. It was called that because it was built sometime in the 17th century and or 18th century possibly, and the owner was a astronomer, and he had this big turret built, which was made of stone, in his house, and there was a slot there where you could see he had his telescope, and apparently William Blake had stayed there in time. So I thought, okay, so that's when Turret House. So I called it Turret House in his memory, and so that's how it started. It was sort of towards the end of COVID. It was in March 2022, when I started it, and didn't really know what I was doing. But as I said, it was something that I always wanted to do, and so didn't realize how much work it would be at the time. But I've never regretted the decision. It has brought a lot of great writing, and it's included, and I've been included in a great community of independent writers, independent publishers, and writers from across Canada. And so the community is incredibly tight knit. We have, there's a Oktoberfest which started last year of independent publishers here in Montreal. There's always the Blue Metropolis, which I haven't been able to attend since I started. I'm going to try to get to that. And there's the Ottawa Small Press Book Fair in Ottawa. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of go over some of the small presses that I know of, and some of the constraints that I'm aware of with some of them. And I'm sure some of you have already been exposed. So I don't pretend to know everything. As I said, I've only been at it for a couple of years now. So first off, Turret House is a one-man operation. I pretty much do it myself. I do have an editor, a proofreader, my brother-in-law, who I don't pay, is my proofreader, and he's very meticulous in terms of grammar and spelling, and so he gets things that I miss. But in terms of editing, that was one thing I was always very nervous about, because I have some, as a writer, I have some experience in working with editors, and I always defer to them. And so I was always worried about people deferring to me when it came to their writing, which doesn't really happen. So that's good. So my own, a little while ago, when I started writing, when I started taking poetry seriously, a friend of mine, Stuart Ross, who's kind of a guru when it comes to the world of small press and micropress in Canada, said to me, he said, "Oh, you know what? There's a guy in Ontario, and he publishes a little magazine called Stone the Crows, which I don't know if any of you have ever heard of. And it's this little poetry magazine that he publishes once or twice a year. I'm not even sure if he does it anymore. And he, of course, I can't remember his name, the person who does it. I'm killing myself for not knowing. And so I sent him some items, just a few poems, and he liked them. So he, published it in this magazine here. And in this magazine, of course, is Nelson Ball, who's a bit of a hero of mine. Stuart Ross, again, has become a great friend of mine over my time here in the micropress community. And so he published this magazine, and then I got a note from him a little while afterwards, and he said, "Oh, if you ever want to put together a chapbook," I didn't really have any notion of putting together a chapbook at the time. Let me know, and I'd be interested. So I asked him, whether or not he wanted, just a collection of, random poems or something of a theme. And he said, well, he preferred to work with something in a theme, something that's of a piece, right? And so with that in mind, I started putting together, I started writing little poems during my commutes to and from work. I work in an office downtown here in Montreal. And so I wrote a series of poems based on my commutes and observations as I'm commuting, which became this chapbook here. It's called Bus Metro Walk. and it's published by Monk Press. This is the only one you'll see picture of me as an author where you see me without a beard. It's by Monk Press in, I think he's in London, Ontario, or in Delhi, Ontario, which isn't too far from London, Ontario. And so this was the first time I ever saw my name on the cover of anything. And so this was a big thing for me, which is also another thing which I think, which is a great purpose I think the micro presses and independent presses serve. It allows people who haven't been published before to get some exposure, to get some experience in terms of working with an editor and working with a publisher, where the stakes are relatively small, and no one's making any money. Everyone's just doing it because they love the work, and so it was an incredible confidence booster for me. Which led me to have the confidence to actually create a full-length manuscript and actually get it published by a publisher in Toronto. And so I wanted to give that back a bit to that community. And so I have some examples here of some presses of not necessarily my own, but just to give you again, a lot of you are probably well aware of this, but some presses publish little things. This is Puddles of Sky Press. This is a little magazine that Michael Castiles in Ottawa publishes called Stumped, and it's hand stamped. So this isn't done on a computer, this is handmade. So this kind of thing, the amount of work that goes into something like this, each of these pages were cut individually and put together beautifully. So that's one version. He also does a magazine. He also does little publications like this. This is Jason Haru's Blizzard of None. And again, this was done on computer, but again, very small. I think he publishes copies of like 80 copies of this. And you also have other examples. One other thing I wanted to talk about was, again, I might be all over the place, but George Bowring. Those of you who know who George Bowring is, first parliamentary poet laureate of Canada. He was, during COVID, he was asked by Andre Farkas, who's a Montreal writer, who is the who's the curator, the ward of Artie Gold's literary estate. Artie Gold was a Montreal writer in the 70s who died, I think, in the either late 70s or early 80s. I can't remember exactly. And Andre asked George if he would edit a book for publication of Artie's unpublished poems. So George at first kind of turned it down because he was busy with his own writing. And then during COVID, George kind of took it up again. But he decided that he wasn't going to edit the manuscript. He was going to interact with it. He was going to collaborate with it. And so what that led to was a, what I understand, again, I'm not a literary historian by any stretch, as a kind of a unique thing of a living writer collaborating with a writer who has passed on. I'm sure it's happened before in the past, but it's the only Canadian instance of it that I'm aware of. And George probably could have gotten it published. He probably could have found a publisher for it in Toronto, or he probably could have gone to Vehicule with it here in Montreal. He probably could have, he probably could have found a publisher for it. But instead, because of his roots of starting off in the micropress world, he decided that, you know what, I'm going to break it up into 5 sections and allow a micropress from somewhere across Canada, micropresses across Canada, to publish it. And so he did, and I was, Turret House was one of the publishers, because I had worked with George before on a chapbook of his with Artie again. So he chose 5, and what we have now is this 5-volume collection, and it's a full-length manuscript broken up into 5 pieces, and with it you can really see a cross-section of different micropresses across Canada. You can see this one here was done by Stuart Ross's Proper Tales Press, which is in Cobourg, Ontario. This one here was this is Nose and Book, which I believe is Western Canada. I think either BC. Yeah, this is in British Columbia. And this one here. And this one here again, which is, I love these stitched ones like this. This is Laurel Reed Books, and this is in Stratford, Ontario. This is mine here. This is from Turd House. It's called 12 Cent Stars, and here in Montreal. And this one here, which is another great micropress. This is Apartment 9 Press, run by Cameron Anstey in Ottawa. He makes beautiful books, and this is the last one. So it's a real testament, I think, to the small press world that George decided that he just wanted to put these out on micropresses, where he could have gone to another. It reinforces what I believe is the importance of micropresses, because it allows authors a certain freedom, and it allows authors a certain how can I say an outlet that might not necessarily produce, for things they might not necessarily get published elsewhere. John and I were talking before about Derek Webster. Derek Webster is a Montreal and Toronto writer. I think he's based in Toronto, but he spends quite a bit of time here in Montreal. So this, I just published this book of his called The Thinker. Now, a version of this is in his latest book, which is published by Véhicule Press here in Montreal, but it's not the full version, right? So this is the full version of this long poem that he published in his book. And so this is another thing that allows authors, because of the constraint of a full-length book, and because of the economic, again, nobody's making money, right? Especially on poetry. So there were constraints for his book with Véhicule that I didn't have. So he was able to actually publish and have, let out there his complete vision for this long poem, which I was more than happy to do. And so, because it's actually fantastic, if you ever get a chance, I have copies if anyone wants to, but I'm not selling anything. That's not what this is about. So that's another thing that I think is unique about the independent micropress. As I said, it gives writers a bit more freedom. Like I give editing advice sometimes, depending on. I had a manuscript just recently that I published, which was this one here, which by a Montreal writer named Simon Peter Egertson, called Hawking Comes Close to Finding God. The original length of this manuscript, when it was sent to me, was over 60 pages, which is basically a full-length book. And I told him that I could not publish, because this is the other thing I want to talk about when it comes to micropresses and submitting your work to micropresses, is the constraints that a lot of us are under. Anything more than 40 pages is very tricky for me. My printer, once a page gets a bit thick, you can't really, I think I published one, which was about, what was it? I guess 52 pages. And that was a bit too thick. So I told him, like, look, we've got to get this, under 44 pages or less, including title page and everything like that. And so when you're submitting your work to a micropress, you have to be aware of the constraints of that micropress, because I publish about 12 chapbooks a year. So I do 4 mailings a year, one in the spring, one in the summer, one in the fall, and one in the winter. And I do 3 chapbooks each mailing. And so because of that, I am very, obviously I'm limited in terms of the amount of the work that I can accept. But at the same time, I also publish things in 2 formats. I publish things in the 8.5 by 5.5. So that's a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper folded in half, and also in the 8.5 by 14. I've received manuscripts that would be virtually impossible to fit within that format. And I've had to sort of, because I get, sometimes I get these, 8.5, everyone submits their things on 8.5 by 11 through Microsoft Word. And sometimes if they take up an entire 8.5 by 11 sheet, and if it's formatted that way, in order to make it readable, it's almost impossible for me to format it in that sense. And in which case, not that I still consider the work, and if I really love it, I will say, like, look, I really like this, but we have to fit it in order to, I have physical constraints of the things that I can publish, in the same way that, Cameron has physical restraints in terms of, Michael has physical constraints, and so, you wouldn't send a 20-line poem to get published in something like this, right? You have to kind of pick your audience, and also the work needs to be able to not only fit the style and taste of the micropress, it also has to fit the physical constraints that some of them have. My first one that I did, I had because all of my chapbooks up until recently fit within the 8.5 by 6.5 or 5.5, sorry, format. But a friend of mine, Pat Berman's here as well, a friend of ours named Morris Bailey, who some of you might know, and some of you might remember. He passed away recently. A friend of ours, Sarah Burgoyne, and I wanted to put together a collection because he received a very an awful prognosis, and that he didn't have long. He wasn't long for this world, and so we wanted to put something together for him as a collection of poems for him, which is, again, I was incredibly privileged, and I was incredibly lucky that I had this press to do this for him, because it was just something that I had asked him long before he was sick. I asked him for if he ever wanted to do a chapbook, I would be interested, because I love his writing. But a lot of his poems didn't fit in my format. A lot of them had very long lines, like this one here. So if I was to format in something like this, it just wouldn't look right. His line breaks would be all over the place, and it wouldn't work. And so, necessity being the mother of invention, I said, okay, well, for Morris, I'll expand, and I'll do this wider format. And I was glad I did, because it also led to this one here, which was written by Rob McLennan, which is also by the same format, because Rob likes his long meandering lines as well. And so it also, the micropresses, they're rigid, they have their constraints, but there's also a certain amount of flexibility there as well. And very often, if the publisher likes the work, they will work with the author to make it work somehow. So that's always important to keep in mind. And depending on also how many copies because there's a publisher here in Montreal. Sorry, I'm kind of meandering a bit. There's a publisher here in Montreal, Cactus Press, which is run by Devin Gallant. He publishes beautiful chapbooks. They're absolutely stunning, but he does them in runs of, I think, 30 copies. So you'll be very happy with the actual book, and it depending on the kind of exposure you're looking for. But 30 copies is what he does. So it's a very small market that he deals with. I do slightly more copies, but his chapbooks are very kind of glossy and very much more expensively produced than mine. So we probably end up spending about the same money per publication. But he goes into a bit more nicer materials than I do. But the author alone gets 30 copies of my chapbooks. And then I have I have about 40 subscribers right now. So it depends on the kind of exposure you're looking for as well. If you just want something that you can have, and you have a small, it's very niche, and you're looking for a smaller audience, then that's the way to go. Otherwise, there are other chapbook publishers that have a bit of a wider range. I am somewhere in the middle right now. I'm working on it. We're working on getting more subscribers, but it's right now that's where I am. So depending on the kind of work you do, I'm sort of focused on poetry right now. I'm not really focused on. I know there are some fiction, chapbook publishers who publish short stories or microfictions or experimental fiction. But yeah, that's not what I do. But oh yeah, so this is actually an example of Cameron. This is my friend Dan Rose chapbook for Cactus Press. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book, very well produced. But yeah, so they're published in runs of 30 copies. And again, I think he probably runs more. He probably prints. Oh no, 25 copies of the first printing. So depending, of course, on how they sell, he'll probably run more. But I print a little bit more right off the bat because it's cheaper for me to do that. Other than that, the other thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, well, let me actually take a quick break here. Is there any questions? Anyone have any questions so far? How long have I been talking? Okay.
We do have a couple of questions in the
Oh,
chat.
sure.
Oh, sorry, Deborah, did you have a question?
I did, but I see that the people in the chat that asked questions first, so they can go ahead and I can ask after.
Sounds good. Mazad Sharif asked, can you elaborate on how you help with getting visibility? And I think, Mazad, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you mean how you help with getting writers visibility that you publish.
Oh, okay, sure. I have an in. Devin Gallant has a reading series called the Accent Reading Series here in Montreal. So I have had a few writers. He does allow me to send a few featured writers for that. We do launches. I actually have I have a website, but my website this is one of the things because I'm doing this all myself right now. The website is pretty terrible. It looks like it was, it looks like a sort of mid to late 90s website. It's anyways. So if anyone knows a young web designer who's looking for to beef up their portfolio for little to no money, then please send them my way. So like any independent publisher, my resources are limited. There are events. I do book launches here and there. I've launched books at the Cafe 92 here in Montreal. We have an event actually coming up. I believe it's August 16th, Friday, August 16th, as part of NDG Literary Arts Week. I have 3 authors who their book there. And I have Derek Webster's going to be there too, and Cheryl Halpern's going to be there too. And so I try to, as much as I can, I try to get authors out. During the Festival du Poésie de Montréal, I was invited to co-host an event there. Catherine Cormier-LaRose is a friend of mine, so I had 4 Turret House authors featured there. So, but a lot of the time, it's also good for the authors to kind of self-promote their own work. I will do whatever I can to support them in anything, but if they have a venue that they know of that they can launch books for, I'll try to help them find a venue, because I know there's Argo Bookstore, which will allow for chapbook lunch. There's Pulp, which is a new bookstore it's on Notre Dame, I think. It's somewhere in the anyways, there's Pulp
I believe
Bookstore.
it's on Wellington and Verdun.
Yes, Wellington, yeah, in Verdun. Thank you. And there's Phoenix Bookstore here in Montreal, and there's venues that are willing to do this, but there also are you know, reading series. There's a tree reading series in Montreal, on Ottawa. There's also, as I said, Devon's accent reading series. So I try to get, you know, I do what I can, but also a lot of that falls on the author as well. Sometimes it's good to, you know, depending on how busy I am, you know, it's always kind of good for them to kind of don't be afraid to self-promote as well. I'll do what I can regarding as far as social media and as far as events go. But I like working with authors who are also willing to kind of put themselves out there as well, because it helps me and it helps them. I hope that answers your question.
Great. Thanks, James. Next question before I hand it off to Deborah. Could you tell me how we find these micropresses?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. You know what? There is a directory that is available. If you Google Small Press Canada, you'll probably come across, there's a directory that lists every small press that has registered for this. I believe I registered last year. I kind of missed the first year. So there is a registry of it. I will try to find it. But if you Google it, you should find it. It's a pretty comprehensive list. It's updated every year, so some of them might not still be in operation. Who knows? But there is an actual directory for it. The other way you can go is if you go to events, if you go to festivals like the Small Press, as I said, the Small Press Book Fair in Ottawa. There's a lot of small press. Well, also, well, I guess they're still considered small press, right? Places like Book Hug or Invisible Publishing, other you know, people who publish not only chapbooks but books as well. Independent publishers are all there, and there's we hold Blue Metropolis is another one where it's good just go and you can meet these publishers. None of us are particularly hard to find. The one thing I noticed is if you reach out to a poet and tell them you like their work, or if you reach out to an independent publisher and tell them that that you like their publications, they will get back to you. We are not shy. We love the attention because we don't get a lot of it on a grand scale. So we're very hands-on, and we're not hard to find. But yeah, look for that directory. If not, what I might do is I'll send a link to John and he can publicize it. But yeah, there is a directory of these presses across Canada for ones who've registered. There might be some that haven't. But you know, I guess the internet's probably your best bet.
Great. And Locke Bailey in the chat just mentioned there's also a book by Jim Johnstone from 2023, Write, Print, Fold, and Staple, which includes an excellent list of Canadian micropresses. So thanks for that, Locke.
There's also there's also one just before. There's also another book by my friend Stuart Ross. He's written two of them called The Confessions of a Small Press Racketeer and The Further Confessions of a Small Press Racketeer. These are sort of nonfiction books about his experience and his you know, his ideas and thoughts behind small presses, which are very interesting and very enlightening when it comes to the world of independent publishing.
Great. Excellent. Deborah, you had a question?
Yeah, well, first of all, the story of how your press started is really beautiful. Someone commented on that in the chat as well. And you've also mentioned this is really like a labor of love amongst a community that has, you know, sort of strong connections with one another. But I was also wondering about sustainability in Turp Press. Is the plan to just continue to do this as long as you can, or is there a kind of model where you can sustain yourself through sales or?
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. So part of the part of my uncle's estate was I put some money aside to start this press. And so I put it in a separate account. And so that is the Turret Press account. So none of the money that I make at my job, because I do have a day job, none of that money goes into the press. But any money, including any honorarium that I get in terms of readings or anything like that, any sales, all my subscriptions, all the money that I get from subscriptions. Subscriptions are $65 a year, and that gets you 4 mailings. So that all that money goes back into the press. And so I'm just trying to have the press sustain itself for as long as I can. Right now, I'm pretty stable in terms of my subscriptions, just about cover my printing costs and my mailing costs. And then other events like, as I said, the Montreal, the NDG Arts Festival, I'll be there with some things to sell. Any other sales that I get online, anything else that I get just goes into the ad account, and that's it. I have also, some people have actually given me donations, which is amazing. I don't have a Patreon account. I don't really want to go that route. I like the sort of the day-to-day kind of, I like it to be a more personal experience. So if people want to, donate money to the press just to sort of keep things going, I will, I will accept that. But I don't like the idea of perks outside of subscribing or outside of buying any of the publications. I also, it's a lot for me to keep track of. So I only right now, even subscribing, I've given a few subscribers who started in the fall and winter kind of a free pass for the next 2 ones. And because I'm only going to I only want my subscription renewals to happen in the spring, because that's when the majority, because it's too much for me to, send notes out to people. I can't sustain that. It's too much to keep track of. And I'm afraid I'm going to charge people when I shouldn't and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, all the money that I make goes into, and I'll keep doing it as long as I can. And as long as it's interesting to me, which it is, it's been an incredibly enriching experience. I've got to meet so many neat authors who I would never normally come across, and I've been able to support some authors who didn't necessarily believe their work to be publishable, which is strange to me. And so I like that idea too. I like the idea of creating that community. I think is important, particularly where writing is concerned, because as I said, from day one, no one's making any money on doing any of this, right? So we all do it because we love it. And we all do it because it's something we're compelled to do. So if people have helped me, the micropress world has helped me sort of get my feet wet and and kind of boost my confidence to the point where I'm, secure enough to sort of send my work out to publishers. If I can help someone do that, then that's great. The other thing I want to say was the one thing I was a little bit nervous about when I started Turret House, because I'm an author, I'm a writer myself. I was worried that the more time that I spent on the publication of other people's work is the less time I would have for my own writing. But I found the opposite to be true. The more you immerse yourself in that world, the more you expose yourself to different voices and different ideas and different artists. It fuels your own creativity as well. So it's been incredibly helpful in my own work as well. And also it's opened some doors for me as well. Rob McLennan, who's run a small press in Ottawa called Above Ground Press, and I think he's been doing it for about 25 to 30 years now. I had an idea, I put together, it was during COVID, and I was a little bit, like we all were. I was struggling, and so I was kind of I was playing around with things that I was writing, and I wrote this series of poems based on the line, "A hot dog with mustard and relish," just that line, right? And then I created anagrams, and I just kind of mixed these things together, and it became this sort of series of short, and it was very experimental and very strange, and not even the idea of publishing it anywhere else than a micropress would be completely ridiculous. And so I sent it to Rob. Well, first I sent it to my friend Sarah Burgoyne, who's got really great instincts about this kind of thing. I sent it to her and I said, "Is this something?" And she said, "Oh, you should send it to Rob." This is before I started Turret House. And so I sent it to Rob. Rob liked it, and he published it under his above ground press here in Ottawa. And it's called The Hot Dog Variations. And it is the weirdest thing I'll probably ever write. And I'm so glad that it's actually out there in the world. It's just this strange little thing, and nowhere else other than the independent micropress would publish a thing like that. And I'm just tickled that it's out there. So that's another kind of great thing about micropresses, and that, if you've got something strange, something kind of out there that you don't necessarily think mainstream doesn't even come into it, but then a sort of larger press would be interested in, because it's kind of niche or it's kind of small, then you know what, send it out and send it to some micropresses, because you know what, they'll be there, you might find them receptive. Are there any other questions? Pat? Yes, sir. Oh, can't hear you, Pat. I'm still muted.
You're still muted, Patrick.
Yeah. Jim, if you ever wanted to write a book about your small press experience, you could title it "There's a Hair on My Page," but that's a bad idea. But my my real point is, when I think of small poetry books in the old days, they often maybe ended up like big poetry books sometimes, gathering dust in bookstores. And the internet poses, to me, promise, but also risk. And the promise might be that if I become interested in some poets that I'm meeting today through this Zoom or whatever, it would be nice to go to their webpage or their publisher's webpage to read their poems, Mm-hmm. That's something that you didn't do in the old days, because you had to be at the store to buy the book, and it was by chance. So do you have a sense of what maybe the difficulties of making small press poetry available more widely, whether in a person's webpage or in a publisher's webpage? Is it kind of risky?
It's a good question. There are a lot of online journals as well, which I think kind of fits that need, or fits that. I've had a few things of mine published on some online journals as well, and a mutual friend of ours, Emily, has an online has a web page where she will curate certain poets and certain poems, and you can go on there. So it's the idea of the hybrid. I like the idea. I would like people to be able to go to my website and look at because right now all they can do is they can go in, they can see the cover of the chapbook, read the little synopsis of the thing that I've written about those chapbooks there, find out how to buy them or how to subscribe to the press, and that's about it. But I like the idea this is why I need a web designer, because I can't do this myself. I like the idea of them being able to go in and click and read a sample from that book, and I'd like to also be able to expand it, because I've had a few I've had a few authors publish with me for the first time, who then went on to publish their first full-length books. I think I have one right here. No, maybe I don't. Patrick Grace, who is a writer. I published a book of his called A Blurred Wind Swirls. I can't remember the title, of course. Anyways, because I'm on the spot here. So he published a full-length book, which included the work that he had published with me. And I would love to, for Patrick's work, please click on this. And if you're interested in, because I want to support my authors as they go on, right? So I in terms of a danger, again, because no one's really, if I was a science fiction writer, or I was a genre writer where there's real dollars at stake, then yes, I believe the internet would cause cause for concern when it comes to the exploitation of an author's work. But when it comes to poetry, the market is so small. I think any exposure that the internet can give an author, I think is helpful, and I think is constructive in getting that, because the people who read poetry, well, for one thing, they're the greatest people in the world. The people who read poetry are not necessarily the kind of people who would exploit their work. You know what I mean? So it would be, I think, in the context of an independent press where you're publishing poetry chapbooks, I don't believe the internet can be anything but helpful. But you're right in that, with the AI thing that's going on right now, which is just such a tired subject, there's always that exposure. You got something online, it could be used against you. But again, it's not costing you anything, because you're not making anything. I've never been paid any money for anything that I've been put on, that someone has published of mine online. It's just as exposure. Oh, there's 2 poems by James Hawes. These are his books. You can find him here. There you go. It's like a flyer. It's not a big deal. I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thanks, James.
Okay.
Great. Are there any other questions? I see that Rohan has a question in the chat, wondering what a query from an author looks like. But I think, James, you might talk about that a bit more in the next portion of your talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. In terms of submitting, or in terms of query, meaning when an author sends me a note.
Yeah, I think
Sorry,
probably.
yes,
yeah.
exactly that. Just when an author sends you a note, should I just panic and send you my entire manuscript? Or should I, carefully cultivate a very compressed and, utterly desirable smidgen of my text?
Well, I would hope that your entire manuscript will be utterly desirable. But okay, when it comes to submitting to me, anyways, I can only kind of speak for myself. 2 things: the email, just the submission. Look at the submission guidelines of any micropress that you're looking at, because usually there will be submission guidelines regarding when to submit and the format that they ask for in terms of what kind of documentation they're looking for, in terms of something about yourself. So I think for me, all I really ask for is for either a doc or a docx formatted Word document. Send me the whole manuscript. Don't send me a sample, because I want to see, for me, I've submitted to some presses where they've asked for a 10-page sample, but that's usually for a full-length manuscript, right? So I know Knightwood Editions in BC always asked for a sample, whereas other ones, they say, okay, send me your full manuscript, but only send it to me from September 1st to April 30th. So always go by the rules of the publisher, because again, economically and time-wise, we're all very constrained. So we just want to, so you want to make things as easy as possible for the publisher. So in your email, if you're sending anything to me, I just want to know who you are, what your publishing history is, if any. I don't necessarily, I love publishing first-time authors. I think that's, but don't take it personally. I guess the biggest bit of advice I can take is don't take it personally if your work is not accepted. Because I used to do that quite a bit. If I submitted something to a small press or to a magazine or to a book publisher, if it was rejected, they were dead to me. But working as an independent publisher, don't take it personally. Because it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like the work. It just necessarily means it doesn't fit for them for that particular time, or it doesn't necessarily suit their taste in terms of their aesthetic. Because every press has their own kind of set of guidelines in terms of the kind of work that they like. I'm a bit all over the place, so I'm quite open. I had an event last year. Was it last year? I had an event. Yeah, I think it was towards the end of last year, and it was a huge event because I had made a film with my friend Stuart Ross, and so we were premiering that film. It was at the Benny Library here with the amphitheater. We had a huge screen where we showed the film, and then I had a bunch of launches, and it was an amazing event. It was absolutely incredible that I pulled it off. But as I'm listening to the readers, everyone was so different. The voices were so kind of all over the place, which I like. I like. I don't necessarily have a set guideline in terms of the kind of work I accept. If it's about unicorns, or if it's about things like, then that's literally not my kind of thing, but that's probably not what I'm gonna get anyways. So the best advice I can get is actually look through the publications. If you want, order a sampling of them, saying, oh, I'd like to I'd like to have a look at this, and see where your work fits in, or if you kind of fit into the aesthetic of the press, and then send it. For me, I like work that's experimental. I like work that surprises me. I don't really. Some presses are very theme oriented, right? In other words, they like to publish books of a certain voice. Either they're a feminist press, or they're an LGBTQ press, or they have their niche, right? So some of them are very niche oriented, whereas me, I don't really have that kind of constraint. But I'm more, I just like good writing. So if the writing's good and it's surprising and the voice is unique, then I'm interested. If it's something that I've read before, or something that's very kind of how can I say, something that's overly sentimental, then that kind of thing doesn't really kind of stir me. So you can always get a good idea, as to by their submission guidelines in terms of what they're looking for, and in terms of what to send. For me, send me the whole manuscript. I just want to look at the whole thing, and if there's any cuts that need to be made, we'll work on that together. And other than that, all I can say is just read the submission guidelines and act accordingly. I hope that's not a long-winded answer to your question.
It is long-winded, but it's brilliant and very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So the other Yeah, just in terms of submitting. Uh, yeah, really. There's always there's look around, shop around for a publisher, and if you actually submit to more than one at a time, that's another thing I ask for. If you're submitting to me and you're submitting to another small press, let me know, and that way, and if you get accepted somewhere else, let me know that as well. But I think that's common courtesy when it comes to publishing. If your manuscript is accepted somewhere else, let me know. Don't don't say, hey, these guys accepted it, but if you want it, I'll still go with you. I'll 9 times out of 10, I'll say, hey, go with them. It's fine. I'll be good. Like it's again, don't take anything personally. And usually I like to give feedback if I don't accept a manuscript. Because as the press has grown a little bit, I have been receiving more and more submissions, which is great. But I don't always get back to people in a timely manner. So if you've submitted to a publisher and you haven't heard from them for 6 months, say, I think 6 months is a good kind of yardstick. Feel free to send them a note saying, oh, by the way, I sent you this. I would just like a status update on this. I was like an update on the status of my manuscript, and they should get back to you. It's common courtesy, so I believe I will always get back to you. And so it could be that it was either lost in the shuffle because we're all busy people. I try not to let that happen. I'm getting better at it. But yeah, feel free to contact them after a little while and just to let them know that, hey, got a question. How are you guys? Are you still considering my manuscript? And they won't be offended by that, or they shouldn't be. Any other questions? Nope.
Going once,
All
going
right,
twice.
I have a question. Um, this may be a bit gauche, so I don't know. It's about money, which I feel
Okay.
like I just never talk about.
No, let's talk about it.
Like, I'm really curious, I guess, like, how much money did it take to start it up, and how much, like, do you have set aside to keep it going, and how did you
Okay.
figure out those kinds of things?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. For me, I earmarked, I think it was about $3,000 out of my estate. I sort of just put that aside and put that into an account, and that was my startup, having no idea in terms of what my costs were going to be at the time. So once you do that, once I did that, I was like, okay, let's see what it's going to take for me to set up first, right? So didn't really have a website for the first little bit of it. I had a Facebook group, which is free, and I had an Instagram account, which is free, and I had a YouTube channel, which I've underused, which I'm going to try to use more, which is free. There was some software that I needed, and I needed to learn. So I had to get a subscription to InDesign because all of Adobe stuff is on now subscription. So there's that cost that goes through it. And then I went shopping for a printer. So the printing obviously is the biggest cost. So I was fortunate enough to know the guys at Harvard Printing here in NDG. So they kind of cut me a bit of a deal because I go to them for all my printing. So out of that, did I say 4,000? Out of that, or did I say 3? I can't remember. Okay. So out of that bit, it goes down. Yeah. So out of that 3,000, it goes down, it goes back up, it goes down, it goes back up, depending on, every year I get in the spring, as I said, I get a bit of an injection from my subscribers, which is great. And so that kind of sets me up, and depending on what I want to do for George's for this chapbook here, I decided to use nice quality paper. Normally, I just use regular like printer paper. So, but for this one here, because I was going to be sending it to these other micropress publishers, I kind of splurged a little bit and bought some nice kind of textured paper for this one. So I try to keep my costs down as much as I can. I can't pay my authors. I pay them in copies of the book, basically. So they get 30 copies, and if they sell all those copies for the actual price, which is usually when I go to fairs, they're $8 each online, or they're $7 in person. But usually I'll put together a bundle. You can buy like 4 for $20, and that's fine. So as I said, I just kind of it's my account right now is hovering about just under 2,000 right now, and so as long as I keep, I haven't really had any major expenses. I'd like to, if I can kind of keep going and kind of get that account growing, I'd like to maybe on the 5th anniversary put together an anthology and get that publish that kind of as a nice kind of keepsake book, which would be actually a really interesting anthology. I think would be a neat little project for me to do, because I've never edited an anthology before. So and that was about as much as I needed. You can start things for less, definitely, depending on the kind of things you do, and also depending on how many copies you want to actually print. So some people, as I said, Cameron's Cactus Press here in Montreal goes for less copies, but much nicer, much glossier kind of cardstock, and the paper he uses is always like this kind of textured paper. But like I said, he only prints 25 copies of each one first run. Whereas you've got Rob McLennan in Ottawa who prints, I think, 250 copies of every chapbook that he does, and the author gets 50 copies. But again, he uses very cheap materials, which is great, because that means but Rob has he's been at it for a long time. He's got a very big subscription list, so your work will get out there with him. So it all depends on the kind of press you want to run, and also depending on how much actual hands-on work you're doing, because I don't staple I don't have the time to actually put together my books and staple them. The printer does that, so I pay a little for that, because I just don't have the time. But I know guys like Cameron, they hand stitch their stuff. They're much more hands-on in terms of the actual fabrication, so you can save some money with that as well. But yeah, that's, I think you can, anywhere from, depending on what you need in terms of materials, in terms of software and your website and all that, which are expenses that have to be maintained, you can start one relatively cheaply, less than $1,000, I would think.
That's great. Thank you for answering that. Oh, one follow-up question. Who does the cover designs? Do you do those?
I do all of them, except for a couple of times where the author has had preconceived notions, or they've basically made the cover themselves. The way I see it, it's their chapbook, and if they have an image that because Derek had a friend who's a graphic designer, and so I didn't do this one, and I love this cover. I think it's absolutely great. And so if I didn't like the cover, I would probably say, look, I'm not really crazy about it. It's your book if you're happy with it, but I really like it. And also I have my first blurb on one of mine. This is by Diane Seuss. So I actually got a blurb from Diane Seuss on one of my chapbooks as well, which was kind of a big thing. So, but I do all the design on my other ones. This one here, for Morris's chapbook, this is a painting that I did myself actually many years ago. It's a pastel painting, so I do that one. This one here too. So I usually do most of the designs myself because it's fun. I enjoy that. I have I like drawing. This one here is my chapbook. Is one of the first ones that I published. This is just a drawing of a fox that I did. So it's kind of it's part of the process that I really enjoy. I like making covers. If you go to my website, you can see all the covers of all of them. And there's, I think, 2 that I didn't design. So there's Derek's, and there's Jay Miller's as well, because he did a whole series of poems on MS-DOS, on sort of antiquated computer games, and so he had a neat graphic of a mouse pad with a floppy disk with the actual title of it written down, which I thought was great. So I used that. So I'm open to authors supplying their own cover art, but I kind of enjoy doing it myself.
Thanks, James. That's great. It's really inspiring.
Great. Are there any other questions?
Nope. Pat?
What I love about your project and the whole MicroPress project is that it taps into voices and experiences that we're not going to hear on the news. In fact, if you're like me, when the talking heads interview people talking about their lives, you tend to really listen. And it's like there's a hunger for some granularity to hear the voices of everyday life. And I don't know about you, but looking at my poetry, I am writing about everyday people and the things they say and do. And it's good to get that out there, really. And as a person that had a career in sociology, I was very interested in ethnography. And ethnography is not imposing a questionnaire or survey grid on people, but asking them how their lives are and writing from that basis. And the most moving account I heard was from a feminist poet who said, imagine Sappho, the Greek lesbian poet who's a lyric poet, is visiting our city. And you took Sappho into a bookstore, okay? And you took her over to the politics section, the science, technology section. She might tell you, I can't relate. But you take her to the poetry section and she can relate. So she said, I understand this. This is what I was doing thousands of years ago. So I applaud you, James, and the whole project.
Oh, well, thank you, Patrick. That's very kind of you. Yeah, I'm always just interested in. I'm a collector. I think of myself as a bit of a collector when I started this press. So the idea of putting together a library, of things that interest me, or things that that sort of grab me, regardless of who's saying it. I've had LGBTQ writers. I've had writers of all ages and all genders, and very and everyone's got something to say. And if they say it in a way that's, as I said, it's interesting and surprising, I think that's those are worthwhile projects that I like investing my time in. So I don't have any agenda in terms of whose voices I put out there. Everyone's kind of, I'd like to be as democratic as I can. It just, sometimes, like the last mailing that I had for the press happened to be 3 men. The next one actually is going to be 3 women. So it just, and I didn't, and I don't want to artificially shape things up either. Yeah, for me, I try to be as democratic as I can in terms of whose voices, and I think it's a good, I just want to represent the community, particularly the arts community of Canada and in Montreal especially, because my home is Montreal, and I think the English poetry community can kind of use all the help it can get here in Quebec. So I'm just trying to do what I can in terms of trying to get some people's work out there. So that's and as I said, I don't do it as we all do it because we love it. We all do it because we think it's important, and I find it incredibly rewarding. Oh, someone's got their hand up. Loke.
Hi, can you see me and hear me?
Yep.
I was just wondering, well, first of all, thank you so much for the information for giving this presentation. But I was wondering, can you speak a little bit about the subscription model? Because I know that there are Canadian micropresses who do it and they just sell, you can go on their website and pick, 1 or 2 or 10 copies that you want to get, versus you or Rob who are doing a subscription model. And I know that Rob at least sells them individually as well, but I was wondering if you talk about kind of the reasoning behind and why an author might want to pick a subscription-based model press versus one that sells them individually.
Oh, well, for me, I wasn't sure about doing the subscription model to begin with, but I like the idea of a mailing list. I like the idea of also economically, it kind of makes sense for me. So I kind of figure out, I budgeted for, based on paper costs, which tend to change a little bit. I like the idea of, mine is based on Rob's model. Like you can buy individual titles from me, but I haven't necessarily made that as easy as I could. You have to basically send me your address, send me an e-transfer of the money, let me know which ones you want, and I will mail them to you. I'm very good at that, but the majority of my sales have come from either subscriptions or through events, through lunches, or through festivals and things like that. So in terms of, I think the good thing about a subscription is you've got a built-in audience, right? So no matter what, and again, I don't have a huge, a number of subscribers. It's just about 40 subscribers right now. So 4 times a year, I put together my chapbooks. I bundle them into envelopes, and I ship them out. And it's just a way to reach an audience that you wouldn't necessarily reach otherwise. And I've got subscribers in Edmonton, I've got subscribers in BC, I've got a lot in Ontario, I've got quite a few here in Montreal, I've got some in the Eastern Canada, in Nova Scotia, and so it's just I like the idea of having that, and it also makes things easier for people. So, for the idea that, okay, you send me this one-time payment and you get these things for a year. Now, Rob's model, I don't know how Rob makes a dime on his thing, because his subscription is only $10 more than mine. And I get things from Rob, like sometimes like every week, I will get like a thick envelope of so I don't know, his mailing costs must be through the roof. I don't understand it. Okay, he makes it work somehow, and that's fine. And so, we're all, so for me, it just made sense, in that I like the idea of this revenue coming in. And also it gave me, I up until recently, I was a bit of a procrastinator. So the idea that people had paid me in advance and I had this commitment to them kind of forced me to get my shit together and kind of get it done. Right. So for me, it was not only a financial help, it was also a motivator, in that, okay, you know what, people have paid me in advance, so let's get this stuff done. Let's make it, make it good and send it out to people, because I want these people to resubscribe next year. I want them to, and so it kind of makes me up my game a little bit in terms of reliability, in terms of actually getting things out on a schedule. It just helps me. It sort of motivates me to so for me, that's, and I think that would help an author as well. An author wants a motivated publisher. Whereas if you're just selling books online, you're on Etsy, depending on your reputation, of course, because it could be that if you're Margaret Atwood or you're Diane Seuss, no matter who you publish with, you'll sell, you'll do well, that's fine. But for those of us who, don't live in that rarefied air, I think a subscription-based publisher can be a good idea. But there's also something to be said for the small prestige boutique publisher as well. There's like Anstruther Press, which makes beautiful books, which only also publishes one author once, and then that's it, right? So if you get in there, you do a chapter for them, they're basically done with you, and they won't publish you again. Which is, another model which seems to work for them because they've published some beautiful work. Some from people I've known, and I've kind of got a bit of a goal to try to get in there at some point myself. But yeah, so I think it depends. Like any answer, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to reach an audience you wouldn't necessarily reach, I think a subscription is a good idea, because there you've got a built-in audience that's going to get your work. And like anything, it's a mixed bag. Some people will really respond to it and some people won't, but they'll get it one way or the other. And that's really all you can kind of hope for. Cast as wide a net as possible, and see what you can bring in.
Great, thank you so much.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
it did. Thanks.
Okay.
Great. I think we have time for one or two final questions.
Oh, I was really worried I wasn't going to fill this time. This is great. Thank you.
Any final questions or comments?
No.
Going once, going twice.
I'll just make one small comment. If everyone here could either join my Facebook group or, follow me on Instagram or subscribe to my YouTube channel, that would be great. If anyone would like to subscribe, you just go to the website, turrethousepress.ca. And I'm only opening subscriptions in the spring, only because it helps me keep track of things in my. So I'm just going to plug a little bit here. But if you go to my website and you're looking for any titles, if any of the titles grab you, please help support the press and let me know what you want, and we'll send them to you.
Absolutely. I'll include those links in a follow-up email along with some of the other resources we talked about. We do have a few last-minute questions here. Riley has asked, James, what's your favorite poem, or what poem have you loved recently?
God, that's an excellent question. I'm reading. You know what? Hang on. Do I have it here? I might not. My favorite poem. Does anyone, Andrea Cohen, does anyone know of Andrea Cohen? She's an American writer. She wrote this book here called, yeah, me too. I'm really, I really love Andrea Cohen. So I'm reading her. I've got another book of hers, her new book, which came out recently. I've got that. It's coming to me. I'm also a huge Ron Padgett fan. For those of you who are familiar with Ron Padgett, his latest book is called Dot, and it's fantastic. I really enjoyed that book a lot. My favorite first poem that I ever read, again, came from this book here, is Snake by D.H. Lawrence. I was thumbing through this book when I first got it. When I got this when I was 21, and I wasn't really into poetry. And then I was thumbing through it, and then the poem Snake by D.H. Lawrence starts, a snake came to my water trough on a hot, hot day, and I in pajamas for the heat to drink there. I just love that line, and I in pajamas for the heat. Something about that kind of tickled me. And so that was kind of the starting point for me when it came to a poem. But I couldn't tell you. I'm reading a lot of Richard Brautigan. I just got a copy of his book. I was at the Banff Center earlier this year, and I was obsessed with his book of it's about it's Rommel, something about Rommel in the desert. Of course, I've lost the title in my head now. I'm reading that book kind of obsessively right now. So yeah, but I'm kind of all over the place when it comes to reading.
Great. And last question, could you please tell us again the details of the next launch you mentioned earlier?
Oh yeah, sure. At the Cafe 92 Degrees here in NDG on August 16th at 7 p.m. I'll be launching. There's actually a visiting poet who's just come for the festival. She's from the Yukon, so we've got a visiting poet coming in from the Yukon, and I have 3 Turret authors, Turret House authors, who are going to be reading. One of which will be a launch for Simon's book here. Simon, who's a really eccentric, interesting guy, so you should come and hear just to hear him read. So that's happening August 16th, 7 p.m. Cafe 92 Degrees as part of the NDG Arts Week. And then I'm doing a presentation at Misha Solomon, who's another Montreal poet. He's got a workshop going at Pulp Books, and I'm doing a presentation there on August 16th. But yeah, those are the 2 things that are coming up.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this, and thank you especially James for leading this session for us. If you haven't checked out Turret House Press already, go check them out. It's turrethousepress.ca, right, James? Turrethousepress.ca.
Yes, and forgive me for the website. And if anyone knows, as I said, if anyone knows a web designer who's looking for, you know, some gratitude and possibly to beef up their resume, I can't afford to pay them much, if anything. But my website is, please don't judge me on my website because I did it myself and I don't know what I'm doing. So I do the best I can, but it's a work in progress. I retire next year from my job. So I'm hoping I'll be able to devote more time to actually maintaining the website and making my online presence a bit more robust, shall we say.
Great. We're looking forward to it. So we have these lunch and learns every month here at QWF. So we'll have another one in September. Stay tuned for the details for those. And I think that's all, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, and yeah, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, John, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, well, I'll see you around. And yeah, please support the press if you can.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, James. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.